Okay, we can get started if that works for you, Jack.
Yep, I think we're expecting Laura and Cam. Oh, I see Cam. Okay.
I see
Yep,
Laura.
I see Laura. Okay, we're all set.
We're all here. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the September 18th meeting of Heritage Guelph. Welcome to committee members, staff, and invited guests who are attending this meeting. As we gather, we are reminded that Guelph is situated on the treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a city, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. Today, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples of whose traditional territory we are meeting on. Committee members, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest for today's meeting? If so, please raise your hand. Okay. I'm not seeing anyone's hands raised. For the people who have their cameras turned off, I'm assuming that's a no as well. I've received regrets for today's meeting from Sarah Epp and Michael Winters. May I please have members to move and second approve the minutes from the previous meeting on September 11th?
I just want to note we didn't attach the minutes to this meeting just because it happened too soon after September 11th, but we'll approve both September 11th and September 18th at October's meeting.
Okay, so we can pass over that one then. So we'll go at this time, we'll jump into the first item on today's agenda then. So that's 3335 James Street West with intention to demolish a cultural heritage resource. And please note that the property owner will have to come back to Heritage Guelph for a new construction permit. This item is only regarding the demolition. So we will start with the presentation from Jack.
Thank you, Kim. I'll just share my screen. So hello, everybody. Before I begin, I'd just kind of like to make a general note that demolition applications are generally the most difficult part of my job. You know, nobody gets into heritage planning because they want to see things be demolished. However, it's my job and it's our job to use the provincial criteria to help us determine cultural heritage value and use our technical expertise to kind of judge whether something is conservable and should be conserved. So the building we're looking at today is 33 to 35 James Street West. It's located in the Brooklyn and College Hill Heritage Conservation District. Now, I trust that you have all reviewed the report, and in the interest of kind of moving along towards today's workshop, I'm not going to rehash everything that's in the report, but I'm going to go through some of the key documents and images. So the structure on the property first appears in the fire insurance plans in 1922. So you can see the L-shaped little blue stone footprint. Thank you, Stephen. At at 33 James Street here. So this little blue house is contained within the current structure on the property today. You can see in the 1946 fire insurance plan that the property was expanded to the west on the left side of the footprint. Now, that footprint indicates that it is all blue, which means stone. The addition is not in stone, it's wood frame. The original property was stone construction. So luckily, I really wanted to know what this original property looked like, and I was able to find it in a 1940s aerial photograph of the Brooklyn neighborhood. So you can see it's simple L-shaped footprint. I think the like bright whiteness that you see in this image indicates that it was likely clad in stucco and painted white. I was also able to find it in a 1946 aerial photograph, which shows it after the addition. So this kind of helped me determine when that addition was added to the property, sometime between 1940 and 1946. The previous owner shared drawings that his father made when he was redoing the roof to the property. So believe it was in the 1980s. The roof was removed and a steeper pitched roof was added to provide kind of like a second floor, which is no longer in use. It's just a big empty space up there. But I've done my best with the blue in this image to indicate where the existing stone walls are. You can kind of tell just because of the width of the walls on this drawing. So some of the original stone remains, other portions have been completely removed, like in the southeast corner. And much of this is just guesswork. I obviously didn't go in and rip off all the drywall to determine that these are still there. The owner did remove some sections at our request just to kind of show us what was hiding behind those walls. And as you can see, it's like a timber and rebel stone construction. And lastly, I just kind of included an array of interior and exterior photos of the current property. In reviewing the property, our main historic concern was to rule out any link between this property and Matthew Bell's property, which is directly behind. Matthew Bell's workshop is actually about a meter away from the rear lot line of this property. So we reviewed the city directories, the title abstract, and censuses, and we're not able to make any link between this property and Matthew Bell's behind. So although some parts of the stone walls on the property remain, entire sections have been removed. The original windows, doors, floors, and roof have been replaced. And so most portions of the original structure have been removed or destroyed. So it's heritage staff's opinion that the significant alterations to the structure have removed all of the heritage attributes and diminished its cultural heritage value. I didn't believe that the structure meets any of the 906 criteria for determining cultural heritage value or interest, and so it's staff's recommendation that the owner's intention to demolish be considered by City Council for approval. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on the staff report. I'll stop sharing so I can see everyone. I will note that the current owners are delegating today. So you might want to save questions for them, but if there's any questions on the research or my recommendation, I'm happy to hear them. Yes, David, or I guess Kim. Kim, this is your prerogative. You choose.
Yep, David.
Yes. Is there any sense that the various historical aspects of the building were removed in a goal to, to bring about what's happening today? Like,
Right. No, most of the alterations seem to have happened in the 1940s to 80s, kind of, and a lot of it is like what we'd call handyman construction, where it was a property owner who was handy, was able to do a lot of it themselves, but maybe not up to today's construction standards. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge, and it was pretty difficult to kind of determine where the original structure ended and the later additions began. But no, I don't think this is a case of demolition by neglect.
and then, so from what you could tell, the last time any work was done was about in the 1980s.
That's my understanding. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Quick follow-up on that. So this is the last building permit drawings or application you have on file for the city is 1985, it looks like?
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Jet, do you have a question?
Can I ask?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Hi. I wonder, it's a low density residential area. So hopefully if the demolition takes place, the new building will kind of preserve a low density like character to the, like to the area, you think?
Yeah, so the owner is gonna have to come back with a new construction permit. So I'm gonna limit my comments today to just the demolition of this property, so we can then deal with consultation for what is gonna replace it when that time comes.
Cameron?
Last question from me. So, just in regards to demolition, this is for the building only. It doesn't speak to any of the trees or anything on the property. Right? I think the HCD speaks to protection of trees. I'm asking that. I see there's 2 cut down trees right in front of the building already. I don't know when that was done, but just wondering.
Yes. So the HCD guidelines protects the street canopy. So the Norwegian maple in the front yard is protected, and we're in discussion with the property owner about conservation options for that tree. And if a new build would have it removed, requirement of the new build would be to replant to increase the canopy. So if that tree is removed, we'd likely require like 2 sugar maples replace it. But that conversation hasn't been, it's been initiated, but that's not part of this permit.
Okay, so we'd be only in the motion. We'd only be speaking on the building removal, not anything to do with trees. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions that anyone has? No? Okay, so I'll go forward and state the proposed motion that Heritage.
Sorry, we have 2 delegates before the
Okay.
motion.
So do you have them on your screen?
Yep, they're Mike Atkinson and Ryan Pollard.
Okay.
And Joey will hook them up.
Mike, would you like to go first?
I can, I guess, just thank Stephen and Jack for the pre-consultation meetings that we've had. Both Ryan and I do live in the neighborhood and have addressed all the concerns that have been brought up by the committee members, including tree canopy. We aren't at the stage yet of what exactly we want to do. Earlier on, it was the introduction that the building behind, roughly a meter away, was Matthew Bell's workshop. That's also the back of my house. So we've been through that renovation. I want to say it was about 4 years ago now. And this building I've looked at for the past, 13 years when I purchased the property in 2010. So I think Jack summarized everything, and their one request about opening the walls to see what was inside the walls, if there was any significance, was important, and I'm glad we were able to do that. And I'm happy to try and answer any questions that anybody has about the property.
Anyone have any questions for Mike? Cameron?
Yeah, through the chair question. So just have you considered any possible reuse of the building rather than full demolition or even like partial demolition? Or you're set on full demolition of the building?
And sorry, that a question to us, to me?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Yes, the current building is set at the very back of the property, as well as what was commented on, the hodgepodge construction. Both Ryan and I work in the construction industry. The challenge would be, immense when you even give it the right appropriate. It would be too much to try and correct at this point what's there. So we're moving forward with Stephen and Jack with their consultation on what we can put in there to help enhance the neighborhood. But yes, we are set on starting with a clean slate.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy?
So I live in a neighborhood too. So the only thing I would wonder if any other stone is very good, would you consider using some of that for some of the landscaping in the new build?
Yes, absolutely, Kathy, and kind of from our previous work with what we've done from previous heritage permits. If there's anything of note, we've talked about how we could reuse any important minerals that might be found in the walls if there is any limestone. So far, from the exploratory patches that have been cut into the house, it doesn't seem that there's anything there to use. But for this project, it's our intention to try and conserve and reuse what we can in designing the new building.
Yeah. And also, Mike, I don't think that second story was ever used. Like, it was put up and then boarded up. Like, what did it? I haven't seen inside there. Does it look like it was ever used?
Well, pop down. No, it's just a wood structure. And if you take, so I live on 30 Albert Street, directly behind the building. If you were to take a picture of it, the back of that building is all rotted plywood, and there was the previous owner put a tarp up on the roof. I'm going to say that's easily 8-9 years ago. So there are signs that the roof has been leaking for some time, but it was never finished off on the upstairs of that house.
Yeah, no, that's what I remember. I forget what the problem was, but yeah, it's not a good look from your place. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions for Mike before we move on to Ryan? All good? Okay, I'll pass the mic over to you, Ryan.
I want to say I live in the neighborhood as well. I've been in the neighborhood since 1996, and we want to bring the neighborhood up to the other houses in the neighborhood to their standards. So thank you for your time, and I think Mike said it well.
Does anyone have any questions for Ryan while he's here? Okay. Thank you, Mike and Ryan. So I am going to now state the proposed motion that Heritage Guelph advises City Council that they do not object to the demolition of the detached dwelling located at 33 and 35 James Street West. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the proposed motion? Okay. I see Laura's hand, and then David's the seconder. And then can I please have everyone vote on the proposed motion? Okay. You see the hands, that motion has been moved. Okay, so we'll move on to the next agenda item that we have. So we'll now move into the workshop, beginning with the downtown Heritage Conservation District Study Workshop. Number 1, presentation presented by Victoria and Christine Martins, the Senior Culture Specialist at ISI.
Great, thank you, Kim. Let me just share my presentation quickly. Great. Okay, great. So I want to first off start by expressing my gratitude to everyone here today. I know this meeting was an extra in our calendar, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy schedules to make it today to provide feedback on the Downtown Guelph Heritage Conservation District project. Obviously, everyone knows me, but before we begin, I would like to introduce Rebecca and Christina, who will also be presenting today and also facilitating the workshop. They are part of our consultant team from Ecological Services Inc. or ASI. So I'll just let Rebecca and Christina turn on their cameras and introduce themselves and then their experience a little bit before we begin.
Great. Thanks, Victoria. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having us here today. My name is Rebecca Shara. I just want to make sure that the audio is good. Thumbs up, that everyone can hear me. Okay, great. So I'm a partner and principal heritage specialist at ASI, the firm retained to lead the HCD study downtown Guelph. And we're just really so delighted to be part of our project. And we're working with the city, the community, property owners, and yourselves on important pieces of work. We've worked on districts in numerous other historic downtown environments and bring great deal of expertise and perspective on how to really escalate our area of projects and put the district into a place where it's appropriate to do so. We've worked in a range of different historic environments with different land use planning contexts, places like St. Lawrence District, downtown Toronto, where the city's original tech blocks were first head out. We are also working for the historic hub of commercial, institutional, and social life on the side of the Grand River and downtown Bridge. We've also worked at really in places with really different kind of scales, buildings, and developments, places like historic Main Street, downtown Z, Warren, the historic town of Newton, places that grew up the riverside or railside locations. So we play really right across Western Ontario, deeply dense places as well as smaller places and then mid-sized communities, many of which are grappling with intensification and fairly substantial infill. We've also worked extensively in Guelph and really excited to bring that expertise to this undertaking as well. Our team's also supported by Land Plan, a landscape architecture firm based in Guelph, as well as Toten Planning and Design, an urban design and land use planning firm that has worked with the city on a range of peer review studies in the downtown in particular. So together, we feel that we have a really strong multidisciplinary group that leverages expertise and credibility from a lot of different places, but also can really hit the ground running with respect to the work related to Guelph's historical development and the land use planning policy review. That's a big part of conservation district studies. So you'll see me overseeing the project from the consultant side over the next several months and year, including all the technical work and engagement events. You'll see me at public meetings and focus group meetings. And I'm working closely with my colleague, Christina Martins, who's with us here today, one of our firm's senior heritage specialists, and she'll be walking us through today's presentation and workshop exercises. And I'll just turn it over to Christina to introduce herself. Thank you, everyone.
As Rebecca said, my name is Christina Martins, and I think I'll just use this opportunity to make sure that you're hearing me all right. Okay, I see some thumbs up. That's great. I have worked on many of the Heritage Conservation District studies and plans that Rebecca mentioned that our firm has been involved with, as well as bringing expertise from prior positions working on heritage conservation districts in downtown Toronto. I'll be taking you through some information today following Victoria's presentation, and for some of you this may be a refresher if you're familiar with heritage conservation districts, and for others it may be new information. So I'm looking forward to sharing that, but I'm most looking forward to hearing from you today on what makes downtown Guelph special and what opportunities you see for the downtown. So I'll turn it back to Victoria and you'll hear more from me shortly.
Great, thank you. So I'll start with the presentation portion of our workshop today. And I'll start with the goals for this meeting. Christina kind of touched on them in her introduction. So today we'll just provide some context about downtown Guelph for newer members who may not be familiar with all of the work that has been done in the past by the city in other previous studies. So we'll go through that briefly. As Christina mentioned, we'll also review, the legislative process associated with heritage conservation districts. I know most of the committee is familiar with the process due to our work with the Ontario Reformatory HCD, but just to kind of refresh everyone on the process associated with the study phase, which is what we're in right now for the Downtown Guelph HCD. And then we will be looking forward to receiving your feedback on the HCD process, on what you find important in downtown, and incorporating that feedback into our study. And then the structure for today is myself and Christina will be giving a presentation for about 30 minutes, detailing all of our context and the process. And then there'll be time for a Q&A afterwards. And then we'll be moving into receiving your feedback and conducting a boundary exercise as part of our workshop. So I'll move right along into why initiate a heritage conservation district downtown? And that's kind of multifold. Obviously, we do have multiple policies currently in effect that promote heritage conservation in our downtown core. However, as we all know, many of the properties that are within our project area in the downtown are currently listed on the Heritage Register. They're not designated. And come January 2025, those listed properties must be removed to comply with the More Homes Built Faster Act and the changes made to the Ontario Heritage Act. So in order to provide protections to these properties and provide a legislative framework to some of our current policies, we decided to initiate this study to determine if a heritage conservation district would be a good tool to be utilized to promote conservation in downtown Guelph. And we do have previous work to kind of back up that stance. Obviously, we have multiple policies in place, as I've said. The downtown secondary plan does promote the preservation and conservation of cultural heritage resources and our streetscapes. The built form standards that are in place identify specific character areas within the downtown core and also recommend policies to preserve the specific attributes of these areas. And then the Cultural Heritage Action Plan, or CHAP, identified multiple cultural heritage landscapes across the city, one of those being the Old Downtown CHL. And it also identified the need to undertake a comprehensive strategy or effort to preserve Old Downtown, the Old Downtown CHL, and that was recommended as a priority action as a result of the CHAP. Now I'll provide some mapping because obviously it's great to hear about these previous studies, but really seeing it on a map and understanding the spatial context of downtown really helps in understanding the cultural heritage value present there. And I want to start by looking at our project area. I would like to reiterate, this is not a proposed boundary. This is just a starting point for us because the downtown is a large area and it's just a good start, a good place to open the discussion on where a boundary should or would be placed. So this project area outlines the historic street-based area as identified in the built form standards. And it encompasses the majority of the commercial downtown core, as well as historic streetscapes like Carden, Macdonell, Wyndham, Cork, Douglas. It also has some natural boundaries, such as the river and the railways. I would like to also be clear that as part of our public outreach, we are extending this boundary in terms of who we would like to see at our open house and in our focus group. So we are including up to Yarmouth and Woolwich Street, and as well as down south to Fountain Street East in our outreach for our engagement. So we are hoping to receive feedback for those areas as well, even though they're not included in this preliminary project area. Now, as I mentioned, there are designated and listed properties within the project area. There are approximately 29 designated properties and then around 120 listed properties, and then a further 6 cooling properties. Now, these numbers are somewhat fluid just because specifically the Albion bylaw is going to council tomorrow. So hopefully that 29 designated properties will be updated to 30 very shortly. And as we move through our individual designation priorities, hopefully that number will only increase. However, it still shows that the majority of the properties in this project area are currently listed. But also this map, I think, proves the fact that downtown Guelph is a concentration of built heritage resources. Almost every property within this project area is either listed or designated. So I think it is a great candidate, and this area has obviously a wealth of heritage value, and an HCD will only further identify and understand that value that's present. I wanted to show the project area within the context of the old downtown CHL as identified by the CHAP. And as you can see, the old downtown CHL is a bit larger than the project area, and that's why we kind of have expanded the boundary in terms of our public outreach. But I also want to highlight the fact that because there have been multiple studies done previously in the downtown, we are able to build on that previous work. So it is interesting to see that the old downtown CHL directly abuts multiple CHLs in the vicinity, including the Riverscape, Catholic Hill, Guelph Collegiate, Woolwich Street, and even Ward West. And I do want to provide a reminder that obviously thanks to the efforts of Councillor Downer, we do have money to address the ward as a separate HCD project. So it's good to remember that maybe going further east, we will address those areas across the river in a. But this only helps to these boundaries of other CHLs in the area only help to provide a basis for identifying where the boundary for our downtown Guelph HCD could end or could expand or could contract to. And then I do want to include this map of the character areas within the downtown secondary plan as identified by the built form standards. And as you can see, our project area conforms with the historic street-based area, as I said earlier. And this was just a really good starting point for us, and that's why we went with this area as to begin the project, as it is well defined within this previous work. And you can see how it kind of works with the renewal areas and the historic house areas, the residential areas kind of outside the commercial core. And then as the last slide from myself, I did want to show the context of the project area within the downtown secondary plan as well, outside of the character areas. The downtown secondary plan is also an urban growth area as identified in our policies, our official plan. So it is important to remember that the majority of the downtown area has been approved for up to 23 stories, whereas about a year ago is up to 18. So we will likely see development, obviously, in this area. And I think by working through an HCD process, we'll be able to provide some policy framework to both promote development, but also promote heritage conservation. So now I'll bring Christina back in to kind of take over the slides and move forward in the presentation.
Thanks, Victoria. So first, what we're going to do is look at what an HCD is and what it can do in the long term. An HCD is a multi-phase process, and so we'll look a little bit at like the length of that process and what components there are, and then we'll dive just a little deeper into the study process, which is the part of the work that we're in currently and that will take place over the next 6 months or so. Next slide. So an HCD is a planning tool that recognizes an area's significant heritage character, and it puts policies in place to guide how change happens over time. So as Victoria mentioned, this downtown area is within an urban growth center, so change is anticipated. And what an HCD can do is help give shape and guidance to how that change occurs. Changes could be minor in nature, such as standard maintenance, or range to more major changes like demolition or infill buildings where there's empty lots, or making additions to existing buildings. An HCD is enabled under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it allows council to designate a defined area. All properties then that are within that area are protected. They're protected under a bylaw, and the designation is registered on title of a property. So similar to a Part 4 designation, but it applies to a whole area. So since it applies to a whole area, the significance of the whole area is taken into account rather than its individual components. So a lot of what we do in looking at a heritage conservation district is review the interrelationships between features. So it includes the variety of buildings and how they interrelate, physical attributes that surround the buildings, such as the street layout, any trees or landscape features, how the buildings are situated within their streetscape or the broader environment, so how they're set back, their heights, how they relate to the road. We also look at in detail at the roads themselves. Are they wide, generous roads? Are they narrow roads? And how could that possibly have come to be through history, or how does that inform the understanding of the character today? When we're evaluating a heritage conservation district, we look at its features and land patterns and see how they contribute to a cohesive sense of time or place. So we look at how things maybe have continuity or change over time, and how that's reflected today and based on its history. Next slide. So an HCD is comprised of a study and a plan, and ultimately the document that's created, the HCD plan, includes several parts that help manage change as it's happening, so that it enhances and complements the area's unique character. The first part is the statement of significance, and it identifies what is significant about the district's history. This is paired with a boundary that helps to understand which properties reflect that significance. The second part is a set of objectives. These are high-level ideas about how conservation is meant to occur within the district. And the objectives are further detailed with policies that aim to conserve what is significant. And further work is done to create guidelines to support and interpret those policies. The third component of an HCD plan is a heritage permit system, and this provides a context for what work requires heritage permitting and what work does not, so that not all work that happens within a district is subject to a heritage permit. Next slide. So it's important for the community to understand what an HCD is not as well. I think when we come at an HCD as a heritage committee, sometimes we understand why a conservation district may be important and how it can manage change. But for some community members, they may have questions about how an HCD will affect them most directly. So we want to message through this process that an HCD does not prevent or stop changes from happening. So it's about managing change, how those changes happen so that they can be sensitive to the surrounding context. It doesn't require property owners to restore their property or to reimagine it being from a particular time period. So while we identify a significant time period, and that helps us understand which features are help contribute to the significance, we wouldn't be asking people to restore certain elements of their property or their whole property to that time period. So we don't create a false sense of history. We understand that the district will have diversity. And an HCD does not regulate building interiors. So it just regulates the exterior of the structures or landscape elements. Next slide. As you're aware, there's two HCDs, one in force in the city of Guelph and one that is in process. Brooklyn and College Hill was approved in 2014. I just wanted to note that for that HCD, as a reminder for maybe people who weren't here when that one was worked through, that it was appealed, and those appeals were heard by the Ontario Municipal Board in 2015. Ultimately, the appeals were dismissed, and the HCD bylaw plan and guidelines came into force later in the year. This can be very typical in an HCD process that appeals are made, and I'll speak up a little bit more to that later. The Ontario Reformatory project is currently ongoing. The study phase has been completed and approved by council to move forward to a plan, and the plan is in process with public engagement occurring later this year. So I think there'll be some familiarity in the community with what an HCD could mean, because this is not a completely new endeavor. And the next slide. So to just broadly look at the HCD process, it's generally a two-phase process. So there is a study phase and a plan phase. The study phase would result in an evaluation of the area to determine if the area has significance or not. If it's found that the area has significance, a statement of significance is written to articulate the values and the heritage attributes of the area, and a boundary is defined to clearly articulate which properties are contained within the district. At this stage, objectives are also drafted so that the intent of the Heritage Conservation District is made clear. We're currently in the study phase, and we're expected to bring results of the study to Heritage Guelph and the greater public in February or March of next year. Following the study, the recommendations will be brought to council, and council will review those recommendations. Should the recommendations be approved, then we'll enter into a plan phase, and the plan phase will last approximately 12 months. It results in a refinement to the conclusions of the study. So the statement of significance may be refined slightly, the boundaries could be refined, or those drafted objectives. And that's the phase where policies, guidelines, and the permitting system are written. So in the study phase, we're really understanding the history and what is currently present in downtown, and trying to evaluate and articulate what's there. Next slide. So during the HCD study, we ask sort of the big question is, what is the history of the area that we're looking at? So what is the story of downtown Guelph? And then what area of the downtown would best articulate that story? So what themes or sites are significant within the downtown? Next slide. So like I said, we're in the HCD study process now. We're a couple months into it, and we're beginning on our engagement that will occur throughout the next month or so. And just go to the next slide. So this slide provides some details on the study process. We're about at the middle of this diagram. So there's already been a proposal to designate the district, and council has decided to initiate the study. The study's begun, and as part of that study, we're doing public consultation. At the end, we'll present to council. And I just wanted to elaborate a bit on the appeals process that can happen. There's a slide right at the end of the deck. I believe you have a copy of it. So if you need to reference it later on, there's an equivalent diagram about the plan phase. The appeals process generally occurs following the plan phase. So that's at the point where council will determine if the HCD will proceed to designation. At that point, a notice of bylaw is passed and served on property owners and made public. So it's clearly articulated that there is an intent to have a heritage conservation district. And this is at a point where the policies and guidelines are written, so people understand how they will be affected by this plan. At this point, property owners or the public can make objections, and it would be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Something about this process that's important to note is that to appeal, the person who is bringing forward that appeal needs to have participated in the process, and they can participate in two ways. It's either through attending and making oral submissions at the statutory public meetings, or through a written submission to council. So if people are uncertain about this process, it's important that they're participating. So when we move to the public engagement, we'll be looking to engage as many community members as we can so that they're informed of the process and that they can participate and have their opinions known throughout. So I think we would ask the committee to participate by bringing in community members and sharing that this process is occurring. So we'll just look in a little bit more detail at each of the pieces that go into a study, into the study itself. So as Victoria mentioned, there are existing policies that enable this process to occur and that reinforce that there is an interest in the cultural heritage of downtown. So as part of our study phase, we review all of these documents and provide a summary of the policy framework that underpins the initiation of the study. Just go to the next slide. So for the history of the area, we're starting from the information that was provided within the Cultural Heritage Action Plan. So that action plan provides an overall historical context for the development of the entire city. Because we're working within the downtown, and the downtown is that initial portion of growth and development in the 19th century, that provides a very good starting point to understand the development that occurs within the downtown. The action plan also provided themes, and so those themes are this idea that Guelph is a planned community, so the radial plan that Galt develops and which the downtown sits within. That it's a place of connection, that there's Indigenous trails, railways, streetcars, and all of these sort of modes of transportation that interface with the downtown. There's industry that was located within the downtown that shaped Guelph's development. So the agricultural industries are evident, as well as brewing. And downtown is also home to significant institutions, be they religious, educational, or public institutions. So as part of the HCD study, we'll be looking in more detail at those themes because the action plan looked at the city in its entirety. The themes that are presented are quite preliminary and it wasn't looked at in each area in depth. So we're taking that deep look at the history to understand and build on the work of the action plan. So we'll be using primary resources such as historical maps and fire insurance plans, as well as secondary sources that articulate the history of Guelph. To contextualize the themes presented in the chat and understand how they play out within the existing city. Next slide. An integral part of our understanding of the area is to hear from the community. We are not community members as consultants, and so it's important for us to hear what the community values and what the community would like to see conserved. We'll be asking questions of the community around what is special. The questions that we're going to work through today in our workshop will feed into that understanding, and there's a similar set of questions will be brought to the public. So we have a public information center scheduled for October 18th, as well as a focus group that's being established to help support the project as a whole. So we'll be meeting with them in October or early November as well. We'll come back to you, the public and the focus group, early in the new year with the draft report to understand if we have kind of gotten it right, what areas might need a refinement, and to test our findings. We'll go to the next slide. Another component of this study is the inventory. We're doing a streetscape inventory, and we have people in downtown Guelph actually today doing that work. So hopefully the rain, I don't know, it's holding out in Toronto. Hopefully it's holding out in Guelph for them as well. So this initial inventory piece is going to look at the streetscape in a broad sense to understand the interrelationships, and then we'll be coming back to do additional inventory work on the individual properties. This will inform the understanding of the overall character, how the character may differ in different areas of the project area, and to understand what's there today. So we will be looking at things like the building styles, the heights, the massing of the buildings, are they very large or small, any decorative features that are prevalent, and we'll be looking for trends in features across buildings, as well as materials. We'll be reviewing views within and around the downtown, any natural features, and open spaces. The inventory is a real cataloging of what's there today. Next slide. Then we conduct a character analysis, which brings together the history and the inventory to see how things from the past are playing out today. So we look at if there's concentrations of buildings or sites or landscapes that are connected contextually. We look at any frameworks of structured elements, so how the streets, pathways, watercourses, and topography maybe have shaped development. So does the topography kind of create a container for the character and everything is situated within it? Are there streets that create boundaries? Are there pathways that are followed throughout that have importance? We also look at the visual coherence that creates a sense of time and place. So when you're in the downtown area, does it kind of evoke a time? Does it evoke something that we might say appears to be its period of significance? So the decades that really are reflective of what makes it valuable. And we also look at the surrounding areas to see how the area that we're looking at may or may not be distinct from surrounding areas, and that can help us determine boundary at later parts of our process. Go to the next slide. So our work of the study phase is all moving towards evaluation. And so we now will be evaluating the district against Ontario Regulation 906. So should be familiar criteria for people as we use these criteria for Part 4 designations. This structure is also going to be used for heritage conservation districts now. So we'll be looking at the 9 questions in the categories of physical and design values, historical or associative values, and contextual values. Something new that's additional within this evaluation is that each property within the area will be evaluated against this broader evaluation for the district to understand which ones are meeting the criteria as well. So there's a test in place wherein 25% of the properties must reflect that greater significance. I think downtown Guelph and the area that's been defined already, as Victoria was highlighting, shows strength in this area with a large number of listed and designated properties within this study area. So I don't think that this portion of the evaluation will be much concern, but something to be aware of. The next slide. So from that evaluation, we write a statement of significance to articulate any values. I think for downtown Guelph, I think it's safe to say that there is heritage value, and a lot of our work is trying to understand and articulate where that heritage value lies. So there'll be a statement of significance and then a boundary, and boundary can occur in many different ways. And some of these ways, that's how the boundary for the study area has been selected. So things like physical features like the river create a strong boundary. There may also be historic factors. So if we think of Galt's plan, what were the edges of Galt's plan, and how did that dictate how things developed? Galt's plan is much broader than the downtown, but the radio portion is particularly unique, and we may see that articulated within the boundaries description. There might be visual factors, so that idea of distinctiveness from the surrounding area. So is there a shift in how things change? I know just from looking at mapping, one distinct visual and physical factor is the tree canopy alone that shifts between downtown and the surrounding residential areas. You can see that within the aerial topography. And then the other piece that we look at is legal or planning factors, particularly like property lines, because a property needs to either be wholly in the district or out of the district to register it on title. So you'll see in this area there's currently a line going through properties, so that will all be reconciled as part of this property, as part of this project that's the property within or outside of the district. Next slide. So at the end of the HCD study, we'll be making recommendations. The primary recommendation as to whether the area should be designated, recommendations for the district boundaries, the statement of significance, which will articulate the period of significance, or if there's multiple periods that are significant to the district, recommending objectives for the HCD plan, and advise on any changes to existing municipal policies. So there are policies that would be in conflict with the Heritage Conservation District. We'll make those recommendations at the end of the study. So let's just go to the next slide. We'll just pause, concludes our presentation portion. We'll take some questions and answers to begin with. Questions around process or the material that we presented that can clarify. And then we'll move into our workshop component of our time together. Is there any questions that anyone has? Kim, I don't know if you want to direct the question and answer, or do you want me to?
I can leave it up to you. I'll answer then.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Thank you for that comprehensive presentation. If a building is covered by the new Heritage District, what's different now about what a property owner would have to do to make any changes to their property? I understand there's is there a heritage permit they have to get now, or what's involved? What's different?
Yeah, so that's that would be the main difference for ones that aren't already designated under Part 4. So property owners with Part 4 designations within the downtown would be familiar with the heritage permitting process. So there will be a heritage permit. The plan will determine what kinds of changes or alterations would require that heritage permit. So there'll be a list of changes that can occur without requiring a heritage permit, and then changes that would require a heritage permit. I don't know if Victoria or Rebecca want to expand at all.
I can expand a little bit, and just to remind, so as I said, the majority of the properties within our project area are currently listed. So in terms of difference, right now, if you own a listed property, you can make any alteration, obviously up to demolition. That's when the demolition permit has to be heard before Heritage Guelph and before council. So if you have a listed property, you can add on, an additional story. You can add an addition. You can make any sort of modifications you would like. It's only if you, as obviously we heard earlier, demolition application. It's only if you want to demolish the property is when we would become involved in that process. And in terms of obviously, we have these policies like in the built form standards and in the secondary plan, but a lot of those policies are recommendations, if that makes sense. They're not requirements. So there's a lot of should language, not shall language. If that that dichotomy makes sense. If we have an HCD in force, we have a lot more legislative, I don't want to say power, but we do have the ability to have a voice in terms of what change looks like and how and to manage that change.
I could just follow up then. Would this apply to if someone had say maybe trees on their property and they fall in the heritage area? Would that be a type of to move the tree or put something on? Would that be something that falls within this?
That certainly. Oh, go ahead, Victoria.
Oh no, I was going to say kind of similarly with the Brooklyn and College Hill district that has policies surrounding tree canopy within the district. So similarly, tree canopy policy could be implemented as part of the downtown Guelph HCD. We don't know what those policies will look like because we're not at the plan stage yet, but definitely trees and older trees are something that have been included in other HCD plans. So it's definitely a possibility. I can't say for sure if that will happen here.
Okay.
Cameron?
It's a question about, you mentioned the appeals process or an HCD. Just can you confirm my understanding of who is the right to appeal an HCD? Is it any member of the public, or do they have to be a property owner within that boundary, or can it be basically anybody in the city?
It can be anyone in the city that can appeal.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
So one last question. What was the nature, if you have that information, of the people who appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board last time? Was it in relation to specific properties, or was it something policy related, or you know?
Victoria, are you aware? I didn't look in detail at the case.
Actually, I may just ask if Stephen could be brought in because he would have a better idea of the types of appellants in that process. Stephen, do you have any memory of? Oh no, he's shaking his head.
It is available on the Guelph website in the Heritage Planning. There's a link to it. But.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Okay, thank you.
That's true. It just a really quick response would be that the several objections that were heard by the OMB essentially involved at their basis whether those properties would be included within the district.
Maybe it would be useful for Rebecca to speak to kind of the range of appeals that could happen in a downtown district.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and this isn't based on a systematic review of all appeals ever submitted, but based on my experience, usually it's a property owner within the district that is making the appeal, as opposed to the question that came up: can anyone in the city appeal? That doesn't tend to usually be what you see during the appeals process, and it can often be around either the merits of inclusion of that specific property. So, for example, there may be arguments that it's a property that does not, in fact, contribute to whatever the defined significance is of the district, or there may be particular policies that are described as in conflict with other aspects of either municipal or provincial planning policy, or inappropriate based on what the described significance is. So I would describe those as some general trend lines of what we would expect to see during an appeals process.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rebecca. Other questions coming up? Yeah, David? Oh, you're muted.
I was muted. Great presentation. And I just had a question. You mentioned about meeting with focus groups. Have any of these interested parties been identified? Because I was curious if ASI will be reaching out to some groups that might have particular interest in this project. Not just let's say, neighbors or people interested in heritage, but things like the Conservation Authority, Indigenous groups, and sometimes Architectural Conservancy of Ontario is interested in what's going on.
Yes, so as part of, sorry, I can answer this question.
Okay.
As part of the focus group, we created a terms of reference which identified specific communities. So in terms of Indigenous communities, we will be engaging with them one-on-one as kind of government to government. One of the groups as well in our focus group we're looking to fill is the urban Indigenous, because not only do obviously we have our treaty partners with the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation, there is an urban Indigenous population in Guelph, so it's good to seek feedback from both communities. Additionally, as you said, we have residents, business owners, property owners, also like historians in the area, and the Guelph Black Historical Society as well. And we have just put kind of an initial call out. We'll also be doing targeted procurement for the focus group. And to be frank, this is my first day back from vacation, and I have multiple emails in my inbox expressing interest in the focus group that I have not gotten to yet. But even just seeing all those emails in my inbox have really shown that the community at large is very interested in this project and in participating in the focus group. Usually, focus groups are about 12 to 14 people all told. So we're hoping to have a few people who ascribe to the different groups I mentioned. So we'll have kind of a breadth of experience to draw from when conducting these meetings. So we're looking at specifically, as I said, residents, property owners, business owners, as well as a few other communities and stakeholders to participate in the focus group. And we'll, as I said, we've just kind of started a procurement process for the group. But I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to have a diverse membership.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions before we move to the workshop? No. Okay. Victoria, do you want to just bring the slide deck up? And I'll share the broad questions that we're going to be looking at. And then Victoria and I are going to switch screens, and I'll have a place where we can capture the information. So if you just go to the next slide, Victoria. So we have two different exercises that we're going to work through. One is a discussion around character, and then there's a boundary exercise. So we'll first look at character. And so the questions that we have for you are one, to identify special places, parks, streets, and buildings in the study area, and explain to us why those places are special. And then sort of the reverse, the second question is, are there buildings and streetscapes that are in the study area that don't reflect Guelph's character, charm, and sense of place? And then third sort of builds on that first question. Are there sites, spaces, buildings, or open space opportunities that you think could be used to strengthen Guelph's heritage character? So that's the character discussion. So just introduce the boundary mapping exercise, and then we'll switch screens and we can look at these character questions again before we dive into it. So the second exercise is going to be around the boundary. So I'll share the study area boundary, and then we'll sort of look at how you would initially start to refine that boundary with these questions in mind. So describing what you see as being the boundary of the historical core of Guelph. What's the place that tells the story of Guelph's past and gives it a unique character? And what's the area that should be managed into the future as the community changes? Okay. So let's just switch screens.
Okay, we're just giving you permission now. You should be good to share.
I have it now, yeah. Okay, so you can all see my screen. Just gonna make it big. You can still see it? Okay, great. So just starting here with our character discussion. So first question is identifying special places, parks, streets, and buildings in the study area and why they're special. And then those places that don't reflect the Guelph's character. And then if there's places that are opportunities. And I have a map here as well that we can flip to if we need to point out specific places. And you might need to help orient Rebecca and I to those sites. But in general, I'll try to record your ideas on these little, oh, I can't control this. The screen is uncontrollable. Hold on these little sticky notes here. And then we can sort them into the columns. So is there anyone who just wants to start us off? And it can be very like just a brainstorm, just jump in. and share some ideas to get us going.
Actually,
Yeah, David.
can I take the cue on jumping in?
Yeah.
And this is more of a brainstorm idea I just
Yeah.
thought of, but it's also maybe the third column about opportunities.
Mhm.
When we think of heritage conservation districts and we think of the heritage built resources and also the cultural landscapes, we're always thinking above ground. Has ASI looked at anything on the historical infrastructure of the proposed study area? Meaning, I've been involved in projects, not necessarily heritage conservation districts, where they found the water mains were all hollow trunks of oak trees, underground buried railway line. So sort of more of an archaeological, industrial perspective of a potential heritage district that actually adds to the uniqueness of the site. And the other one, I think was in Guelph too, like where road had the old, I forget the term, where they were logs all aligned and then they got buried. And this indicated historical roads as well. So I'm just wondering if ASI was looking at anything related to infrastructure or industrial, really.
Yeah, so that will come out through our historical research. So if there is anything like that, that's something we would be watching for as we do our primary and secondary research. That's also something that if the community is aware of, we'd love to hear about, and can certainly play into the evaluation and understanding of the area. We do look somewhat at the archaeology in the area as well, and so understand what archaeology has been found in the past. But we don't do specific archaeological work as part of this study.
Okay, thank you. And will you permit me one more?
Yeah, go
I've tossed
ahead.
this one out before, but if you're looking at our the parks or the natural open spaces in the area, one thing I've observed about the heritage districts or older historical neighborhoods is that these mature trees that we talk about are growing out of the original soils. Where the neighborhood gets developed, very often the soils are removed or compressed, and you'll see that they can't support that mature tree growth or canopy coverage that we so desire or we associate with the historical buildings. So I'm just sort of toss that out there for you folks to reject or accept. If you look at the natural areas, would you be making note that these have the original soils and these can support mature tree growth that are so much in character with the built resources and historical period of the site? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. No rejection of ideas at this point. Just we want to hear everything, and all ideas are useful in this process. So that's great. The mature trees and the original soils in the parks.
Christina,
Yeah.
sorry, I was just going to jump in just for just wanted
Mhm.
to maybe respond a little bit further back to David's really great feedback and insights. But also I can watch, and just coordination between you and I can maybe watch the hands as
Yeah.
you're, if that's a good way
That's good. Yeah.
to move forward. So David, thanks for the really important, much broader perspective about some things that aren't always maybe top of mind in a district. And I think what the challenge can be is, it's often when sewers are being replaced is when everyone gets a really good sense that it might be a 150-year-old piece of infrastructure, and same thing with soils on a particular site. So we won't have that level of granularity as part of the study, as you know. But to Christina's point, I think um, doing the research or mapping around, where the soil classes change in the downtown, or where there's some geomorphological changes, can help us better understand patterns and sort of boundaries. But then also, where the first historical infrastructure network is laid can also be a really kind of great way to further support, this is the place that was the core. So it'll, I think, largely be secondary source driven, as opposed to, fine grain, knowing what's below the asphalt today in all places. But that those can be, I think, really important pieces to help support, why this line here versus not that line over there for the boundary, which is often an incredibly important and contested part of district studies. So thank you, David.
Thank you.
The other David.
I'm just muted. David, we can't hear you. You just need to unmute. Thanks.
Start again. Sorry about that.
That's
In looking at specific parks, places, streets, buildings, for one sector that I've done some work on and have familiarity with, the legal history of Guelph, in terms of going back to the start to the present, the Douglas Street and the 74 Woolwich building have a long history with the legal profession and the judicial process and the law enforcement in Guelph. I just was an editor of a book recently on Guelph, and there's from really the 1840s on to the 1980s, that entire section of property, which is just basically a street and a half, had all of the legal processes for the city of Guelph conducted and continues to. So for that sector itself, Douglas Street and 74 Woolwich Street have significant background. And right off of there, that's where people used to be hanged after trials. There were 5 people in Guelph over the years who have been sentenced to death by hanging, and they took place in the yard off where the Crown Attorney's office is. So that would be one. Just going by sector, certainly that that part of the downtown has special history that would fall within here.
Yeah, that's great. Great.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised.
Others?
Cameron?
Yeah, so one question I have, so the river is obviously like a natural kind of boundary for the HCD area, but just wondering how bridges might tie into that. I mean, there's going to be a number of bridges likely connected to the HCD area, so just I think there should be some consideration for those in the study. I mean, some of them I think are designated already. The Heffernan Street Bridge, I think, is designated, but there might need to be some discussion of those. I don't know how that works, if it sort of crosses a boundary, if you can still speak to it or not, but just a thought.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we can pay attention to. We are trying to work within the framework of the CHLs that were identified already. So the river scape was identified as a separate CHL from Old Downtown. So we can look at sort of the nuance of like how people connected in and out of downtown. I think that helps to shape the way a downtown forms, kind of those entry points. So certainly something we can look at. Are there bridges that are particularly sort of significant that you think to the downtown?
I'd have to look at all the mapping again, but there's the Heffernan Street Bridge, and then I think there's the Allens Bridge off of Macdonell.
Yeah, so this one, I'm just pointing at this
Yeah,
one. This
yeah,
is
there.
the Macdonell. And then there's the other one here.
Yeah.
The north end. Okay. Okay, that's great. Other, oops. There's special places or parks or streets or even individual buildings. I think even though we know some things about Guelph, pretend we know nothing about Guelph and we're brand new and we've never seen Guelph, and you're bringing us and you say, I'm going to take you downtown and these are the, like, where are you going to take us?
I can
Cameron.
keep asking questions. I guess one thing that you're saying that is that the major landmark is obviously the Basilica, so Catholic Hill. I know that's a different policy or heritage landscape, but I guess like the views of the church and of the hill from downtown are important, and I think might need to be considered. I don't know if you can work that in or not. And it's a separate landscape, but it really is part of downtown, if you ask me.
I would agree with that. And if you were new to Guelph, in past years and said, where is important in downtown Guelph, where would I take you? I would have taken you to the Albion. It's currently not open, of course. And that's the building that we're working on designating. But that building is definitely, right in front of the Basilica and has so much Guelph history. And I think it's really important to people who live in the city as well.
Thanks, Miranda.
And I'm sure you've already considered the Petrie building as well, just in terms of that whole corner of Macdonell and Wyndham, and the Petrie building that you can see there, and all the buildings that surround it on the corners. Another great streetscape, that one.
Okay. Yeah, certainly a standout building. David?
I know you said, let's pretend you don't know a thing about Guelph. And I brought up focus groups, but meeting with interested parties, residents, focus groups, is there a walking tour with the ASI team with residents or interested parties in the works or thought of?
Yeah, so as part of our public information center, we are structuring it so that there's an open house component at City Hall where people can view boards and talk to the project team and city staff about the project. And then during that open house time, there'll be 2 walking tours where we'll be taking people out into the district and sharing with them some of the information that we've shared today around process, and looking at the district as we're walking around. So we won't be presenting a lot of the history or sort of the ins and outs of the downtown specifically, but we'll be looking at the downtown as we explain how an HCD could work within the downtown.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
So are there places that don't reflect Guelph's downtown? So things that are within this boundary that you say, you know what, that's really not part of the story of downtown. I've been curious about some of these edges. There's the River Run Center and the Sleeman Center, and curious if they help contribute, and if they do, why do they contribute to the character of downtown? I don't know if anyone has any particular opinions about those places or others like it. I feel like you're all saying, no, this is all part of this is all definitely part of the story of downtown Guelph. I know when we worked in Galt, there was properties like a grocery store that people felt really didn't fit the character because it had a large parking lot. It was a building from the 1970s or 80s. And I think every meeting that we went to, people said, no, this doesn't help contribute. So I know from what I know about Guelph so far and our walking around that we did at our initial meeting, I think there's a very strong set of buildings, and I think the listing and designations speak to that as well. But yeah, is there anything that you would say that just doesn't seem to fit? And this can help inform us in two ways. So it can inform the boundary itself. So if there's things at the edges that don't make sense, that don't help tell the story or don't need management in the future, that can help refine the boundary. Or if there's properties within the boundary itself, during the later part of the study and into the plan, we'll be determining contributing and non-contributing resources. And so a contributing resource is a building or park or place that strongly represents what the district is about, whereas a non-contributing property does not. So it might be a newer building that's outside of the period of significance. It could be a parking lot. It could be, not coming up with other examples. Kind of that tends to be what they are, but it could be a building that's changed dramatically over time, so that it no longer reflects the character. Are there any properties that you can think of that would sort of fall into those categories? David?
I think the fire department, where it's at now, as I recall, people are telling me it used to be a grocery store back in the 70s and 80s. So right now it's on the edge of the downtown, and it's a newer building that wasn't there during the historical.
Christina, would you mind if I put a sort of question forward
Yeah, go for
that
it. Go ahead.
approaches some of these ideas from a slightly different perspective? Could we roundtable, maybe in a couple of words or a sentence or two, how you would describe just this area, not sort of what's important or what's not, but downtown Guelph, is it a place of buildings from a lot of different decades? Is it really kind of like a 19th century place? Is it commercial and retail and institutional and residential? Just some kind of, I think, more basic descriptors may help part of the description we're trying to get after. Can I put some individuals on the spot? Anyone mind?
The original limestone buildings are a huge part of the character, I think. The late 1800s. Limestone, which is a lot of downtown. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Cameron. Anyone else want to jump in? David?
Yeah, I would add to what Cameron just said, the sort of the aged patina on the limestone surfaces that communicates the passing of the years and the decades, which is how you tell an authentic historical building versus basically a reproduction. And I think is very unique with the downtown.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks, David. Others? There's David and Kim.
Streetlights when you are in the downtown core that are ornate and have a little more detail that kind of gives you a sense of place when you're in the downtown core. So maybe noting those as well.
Great. Are there others we haven't heard from that have some just general impressions of how you would describe what's going on in this downtown in particular.
I can also say part of the downtown like history is unfortunately buildings that we've like lost over time around like St. George's Square and things like that. So that in itself, like it being replaced with sort of like concrete kind of brutalist architecture is part of the history of the downtown. I don't know if that makes sense. Speaking of like what we've lost and how it was replaced, sort of unfortunately.
It absolutely does, and we often work in places where we hear, this isn't just a story of the 1850s to 1890s, but it's a story of 1850s to 1960s,
Yeah.
and it's really the evolution that can be very important. And then in other places, it's like, no, it's a much tighter, smaller, shorter kind of period. So that's I think really useful insights for us, Cameron. Other, I'm just going around my screen. I think we've heard from everyone. There's someone whose name I don't know, and maybe Victoria, you could help me. Starts with the J.
Oh, Jaudat?
Jaudat. Okay. I wasn't sure if the full name was there. Jaudat, did you have?
I'm listening because usually I'm not very much familiar. We moved like 1 year ago to Guelph. I
That's
was listening
perfect.
to.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what my colleagues talked about, and I was wondering also, because I'm not very much familiar with the area, the social life aspect of it. Where the people usually gather, vegetable market, etc. Areas like these, where you have like animation. And this is a very, important part of the cultural heritage issue. They can get gathered in a vegetable market or in a, cultural ceremony, religious ceremony. So these, spaces, courtyards, issues like this. Fortunately, I don't know them very well, their locations, so that I can, identify them. But if there are any, that would be very interesting to highlight them and, animate them, because, culture is also interaction, animation, and another thing I was looking at in the map, like there was like a kind of a square in the middle. I don't know what it is. In fact, yes, this one. So if this is, like part of in any social, focal point, a pole, where all these like roads will, go into, will be an interesting also element to focus on in the plan.
Yeah,
I noticed that the social aspect is kind of missing, like markets and things.
Yeah, is there anyone who can
So if you
contribute?
can highlight on them,
Mhm.
highlight on them. Thank you. And I really loved, by the way, the presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice. Thank you.
Great. I think that's a really good point. This idea around the social aspects of the community and where does the community spend time? Does anyone have any specific places where that occurs in the downtown? And it could be like on a more formal basis, ongoing through the year, or maybe there's informal things that happen at only certain times in the year. Yeah,
Lara.
Guys, yeah, sort of what was striking to me and off of Jaudat's commentary there, there's a very large Remembrance Day ceremony that's held every year in the Sleeman Center, and folks tend to walk through the Old Quebec Mall to get out to that Wyndham roadway where the parade comes down the road. So I think that partially ties the inside access between the Sleeman Center and Wyndham there through Old Quebec Street. I feel like is important as well.
That's great. Thanks. Is it Laura or Lara?
It's Lara. Thank you.
I don't think I'm seeing any other hands up. Miranda, you're, I think, joining us by phone. Is there any further input you wanted to share?
Want to spend some time with the boundary exercise, and we can do that for a little bit and see what comes from that. So to refresh for this, similar to the discussion that we've been describe what you see as being the boundary of the historical core of Guelph. It's what is the place that tells the story of Guelph's past and gives it a unique character? What is the area that needs to be managed into the future as the community changes? Or spots where you're like, you know, that makes a lot of sense, something that resonates with you.
Say that again. I don't know if it's my audio or if everyone encountered you cutting out there. I only got like every third sentence.
Okay.
Christina, it's still cutting out.
Okay, do you want to just
Sure.
recap?
Yeah. So for this exercise, we want to get your input on sort of the edges of the boundary. You know, are there defining features that are holding it really well together, or are there features along the edges that are sort of visually prominent, or do you see the historical downtown as being containing lands outside of the red area that's shown? David?
Or I appreciate it's a study area only, but if we're discussing the boundaries, would they actually include the rail lines? Like, isn't that a whole different story in terms of provincial or federal regulations? Just a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, how far do you think for the rail lines, or which are there certain ones in particular? Because there's the line that runs along the river, and then there's the line that runs behind Market Square, City Hall. I'm just going to highlight.
Just have the feeling CN Rail's not going to follow some municipal, even though they're provincially regulated.
Yeah.
They're not going to follow guidelines of a HCD plan.
Yeah, we've worked in other places where when there are other jurisdictions in play, particularly ones at a higher level, it doesn't necessarily preclude inclusion, but the implementation of the plan can often be in need of a particularly defined process between whatever levels of government or organizations are in play. I mean, we've even found with conservation authorities, there's sometimes a memorandum of understanding that might support the plan. So I think it's up for consideration regardless of the owner and if it's a federal or upper tier. at least at this stage of the analysis.
Thank you.
Cameron?
Yeah, thanks. Just looking at the red boundary, the northwest, I guess, part of it extending beyond the boundary, like Baker Street and Yarmouth Street up to Norfolk there. I think there should be some consideration for including that, if possible, in the area. There's a significant number of listed buildings anyway on those streets. Yeah, I think it does fit with the character of the downtown. It makes sense to include it or look at it anyway.
How far would you
Yeah.
go, Cameron?
Probably, I think there's like on a list or listed properties along Norfolk there on the, I guess, yeah. So that
On
whole
this
kind of,
side of the street.
yeah,
So would you go down the middle of Norfolk
I think so. That's just my
to
quick idea anyway, yeah.
all the way up to
To,
Woolwich, or would you cut across?
to be
I
honest,
don't know
I
what the
can't
street
think
is
of it at the
called.
top of my head. I can't remember exactly what that little street is, but I
Put a
mean,
question mark in it.
yeah.
And Cameron, if I can put you on the spot, you said that it fits with the character of the downtown. Can you elaborate on kind of what that means in either physical or visual terms? So what's the
Yeah, to me, it just feels like there is like just a natural connection as you're walking from downtown through those streets. Like it feels like you're, within the same place. There's a connection. I don't know if others have something to add to that. I mean, I think the building styles are similar, and yeah.
I think Lara has raised her hand either in connection to this or an additional comment.
Yeah, I'm with Cameron on that, in terms of like including that section for sure. And I've been thinking about this question since you asked it about like what is the character of downtown? And it very much to me feels like this mixture of like storefronts and walkable space and places where people are actually living. So we have, particularly around this corner that Cameron has just suggested adding, there's quite a lot of residential spaces within that, but then intermixed within that are storefronts and sort of these little pocket spaces that tie it back into the downtown space. And that's sort of what I was thinking with the downtown area too, along Wyndham and along some of these side streets, is that it's these first floor shop fronts and then apartments above, and that's really contributing quite a lot to the character of those buildings and what we're seeing at the road.
Great, that's excellent, thank you. Other reactions or thoughts about the boundary?
Maybe consider including the farmers market. And two, I know that there's kind of divide with the bridge there, so you would have to go underneath the bridge to get to the farmers market. But that's a really large gathering place on Saturday mornings for people of the community.
I would agree with everything that I've heard in the last couple of minutes from Cam, and I'm not sure who was just speaking, but I agree with those comments as well. That the area along Woolwich there, to Suffolk to I guess it's Norfolk, and including Yarmouth Street where we have the Raymond Sewing Machine Factory, lots of residential use as well, and all the way down, including the farmers market to Wellington Street as well. So many properties there that I think contribute to the character of downtown.
Thanks, Miranda. If I can just ask you to elaborate, because I don't think we've talked about Wellington Street properties specifically. Can you just describe those a little bit more and how the relationships between those properties and other areas?
Sorry, I was having trouble hearing you there. Could I describe what exactly?
You mentioned Wellington Street properties.
Yeah.
And if there's certain aspects there.
Okay, so it's for the street right behind Wellington, which I believe is Surrey. So I'm not looking at the map right now, but there's the property. It's an old Schnur Electric, I believe. That building is along there. There are some townhouses along Surrey as well, going over to, I guess, what is Wyndham Street there. So between Gordon and Wyndham, along Surrey, and then up to include the farmers market. That would be the area that I would propose to include, apart from the one that Cam suggested.
Great. Thanks, Miranda.
Okay.
Christina, did you want to canvass any further feedback, or you want to move into the final segment?
Yeah, I think if everyone feels like they've contributed, we're nearing the end of the meeting. So if there's any other things that you want to contribute today, we can hear those kind of as last thoughts. There'll be more opportunities upcoming, which we can cover, but I see Cameron, you have your hand up, so let's take.
Just quickly, there's one other spot I would like to highlight. So at the corner of Woolwich and Macdonnell, I think it is right where the train bridge goes over the street there. I think there's a sign which is like the spot where John Galt like first cut down a tree in the construction of the downtown. Yeah, right there. Which, I mean, it's kind of just an intersection right now, but it's obviously sort of a key historical point there. And then even it connects to the bridges there too, as well.
Great. Thanks, Cameron.
That's great. All right, any other final thoughts? Okay, so upcoming, we'll be coming back to your group specifically in the new year with the draft report, which will include our findings and information that we've gathered from the public and from the focus group. We would encourage you all to attend the Public Information Center if you are able on October 18th. And I think Victoria or Jack could share those specific details with you so that you can mark it in your calendar. We'll be working through similar exercises, as well as going on the walking tours that I described. It'll be a chance to meet the community and understand what they'd like to see in a downtown heritage conservation district, and to explain how heritage conservation districts work to those members who may not be familiar with it as a planning tool. As well as correcting any assumptions that people might have that are incorrect about what an HC does or doesn't do. So it would be great to have your support in that meeting as well. And we look forward to bringing you that draft report and seeing your reactions to it. And thank you for the information that you've shared already today. And if you can't come to the information center, but you have other thoughts on these questions that we've been reflecting on, we'd welcome you to share those with Victoria, and she can share them back to us to incorporate. Turn over to you, Victoria, for anything else on this study specifically.
Thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate, if you remember anything, or think of anything, or if you go on a walk later and you want to mention any specific buildings, I know this is kind of very brief chat to talk about a large area. Please feel free to email myself directly, and we can pass on that feedback. We will be issuing our public notices about the upcoming public engagement on October 18th, and we will likely ask that you circulate to anyone you also think would want to come and to help promote that message of people coming out. And yeah, in terms of next steps, again, in the new year, we'll hopefully be coming back with the draft report to get your your feedback on that. And again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out at any time, and I'll look to answer those as well. I think over to you, Kim, if there are any other or barring any questions from committee members.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca, Christina, and Victoria, for that workshop. I was going to ask one last time if anyone have any questions for staff. The information that was provided. Okay, good. Okay. So we do have a motion for this workshop, and that motion is that the conference provided for Heritage Guelph committee members on downtown Guelph Heritage Conservation District Study Workshop 101 be provided to staff and council for further consideration. And maybe I have her to move this, Jeanette, and then David, the secretary, and then and all in favor, please raise their hand. That's good. So that's been carried. So next we'll move on to the amendment of the meeting. I'd like the members to move and second the amendment of the meeting today. Cameron, Laura, also listening, and all in favor of adjourning the meeting today as well. Great. That's been carried. Meeting is adjourned. The next Heritage Guelph meeting will be posted on October 10th. That's all for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.